Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be all about how to draw a green cat eye study like this small one here. As always, all of the materials and everything that I've used for this tutorial is listed in the description below, so make sure you go and check that out if you are interested to see what I exactly use. Let's jump straight into this one. So the very first thing I do is use a kneaded eraser. This is just a Faber-Castell kneaded eraser, and I just lift the graphite of the area that I'm going to be adding colour to. If you're interested in how I drew out my sketch as well, there are a couple of videos on my channel about how I use the grid method to get an accurate sketch, which I will link up above for you as well. But once I've lifted that graphite with the kneaded eraser, then I just go in and add the dark outer details first. So I just use a dark sepia Faber-Castell polychromos coloured pencil, add in the dark area, and then go over and really exaggerate some dark areas like the pupil mainly. And then I just use a Prismacolor white pencil with hard pressure and then go in and add the highlights to the eye. This is really important that you get those in. Once those important areas are established, then it's time to start to add colour to the iris. And I just start off with my lightest layers. For this study I started off with cream and just used a small circular motion with my pencil. It doesn't matter if the pencils aren't too sharp or anything at this point, but just make sure they're not too blunt. And then I just work in layers going gradually darker. So I used some permanent green, and then I went in and used some green gold, some earth green, and then going in with some of the darker greens around the pupil, so using some dark phthalo green, and just gradually getting darker the more layers that you add. And you want to make sure that you always use this circular motion when you are drawing eyes, because it gives a really nice smooth surface. It makes it look really nice and glassy and smooth. You don't want to have any kind of back and forth lines when you're drawing an eye, otherwise it's going to look unrealistic. So just make sure that you keep your pressure light on your pencil and you use those small circular motions. And if you are going back and forth shading, make sure that you do it in several different directions rather than just one direction, otherwise it's going to look really flat. Once you've established a few of the darker areas and kind of worked in a few of those darker colours around the pupil and also around the highlight areas as well, then you can start to add in the shadows around the very outer edge of the eye. And for this I just go in with a darker green, so for this I used an olive green yellowish. And then I just built in some nougat and went over with some dark sepia just to really build up those dark tones. Again, you just want to make sure that you use really light pressure and really lightly build your layers. It's so much easier to make something darker than it is to make something lighter when you've gone too dark too initially. So make sure that you work in those light layers and build them lightly, and you're going to create more depth by doing it that way as well, which is exactly what you want in an eye. You want to build a really nice good sense of depth, so build your layers lightly. Once I've added in a nice sort of dark outer edge around that edge of the eye, I can then start to add in some details. So again, I just go back and use some of my darker greens, so some dark phthalo green, just working around the pupil once again. And for the details in the eye, I go away from using that sort of circular motion with the pencil, and I just use some back and forth shading and some lines kind of spiraling around the pupil. So if you look in detail and in depth at an eye, you'll notice that there are like these bands which kind of spiral out from the central pupil, and you kind of want to replicate that. So make sure you use some lines coming all around, like spiraling around the pupil and then coming towards the outer edges of the eye, and just make sure that you mimic any kind of darker details that you can see in your reference photo. The reference photo for this, by the way, came from Pixabay, so I will link that if you're interested in going and having a look at it. And you just want to slowly build in those dark details. Just take your time, really analyze your reference photo and just see where those darker details are and where those shadows are lying within the eye. Now when it comes to adding the highlight, you want to make sure that you add a kind of darker crisp edge around the highlight so that it really picks that whiteness up. That was really bad terminology there, but adding a darker area around a lighter area makes the lighter area appear so much more brighter. So make sure you add some darker colours around the highlight, and also make sure that you add in any kind of reflections that you can see. Again, just working in light layers. I actually used a white jelly roll pen, Sakura jelly roll pen, to add in additional highlights and little bits and pieces within the eye, and this works incredibly well. So if you can't pick out your details just using your white pencil or by using a negative space method, which we used at the beginning by going around the whiter areas, then you can use a white gel pen, or you can use some white gouache or acrylic paint or anything. You just want to make sure that if you are selling your piece or anything like that, that you make sure that it's archival and that it's going to last. But if you're not too worried about that, you can use whatever you like. So to build up the glassy look of the eye, every now and then what I did here was just blending with the white pencil and some of the lighter colours within the eye. So I just went back in and used some cream, some of that earth green, and just worked in ever such slightly different directions just to make sure that everything was really nice and smooth and all of the surface area of the paper was covered. It just gives you a really nice glassy look, makes it look really nice and smooth. And to get that three-dimensional look, all you need to do is just make sure that you have that darker outer edge and that you have a lighter band through the center of the eye, kind of spiraling sort of in a semicircle up towards the upper eyelid. And then you want some darker areas around the pupil and around those highlights as well. It's going to give you a really realistic look for your eye studies, and this just goes for any kind of eye, not necessarily this particular one. It's just a general rule that you want to try and follow. So for the fur around the outside of the eye, it's my favourite, it's white fur, and I started off just by adding in the eyelids. So for the eyelids I added in a base layer of some warm grey one and some cold grey one. I mixed the two so that you get a really nice tone. And the eyelids and the kind of inner corner of the eye were these really nice pinky bluey purple tones. So I used things like cinnamon, sky blue. I even used a little bit of purple violet and that earth green, which was through the eyes to just kind of tie everything together. I also added in some purple violet to the shadows of the eye. Using some purples and greens together works really well. So if you're wanting to add some depth to your shadows for green, add in some purple. I'll give it a really nice big punch. So for the fur, I just added down a base layer of some warm grey one, worked over the entire top section, just working in the direction of the fur, and then I went over with a secondary layer and also with some cold grey one, as I did with the eyelids, just to create some more shadows and to highlight some of the kind of darker areas within the fur. And white fur can seem a little bit daunting to some people, and if you want a little bit more of an in-depth explanation on exactly how to draw white fur, I do have another video on my channel which I will link as a card up above for you guys, and also in the description if you want to check that out. But basically white fur, you kind of have to think of it like white light. So if you look at white light through a prism, you often get that, well, you get that rainbow effect, and that's kind of how I tackle white fur. Just think of it as a white light. There's every single colour that you can imagine in a white light, and I just translate that into fur. So I just add in blues, I add in pinks, purples, yellows, all of the colours that you can think of. But also when I am drawing white fur, I try to take into account like anything that is reflected on the reference photo. So if you're drawing a whole animal and it's sitting in a garden, you're going to get quite a lot of like greens, you're going to get some blue from the sky reflected on that white fur. So try and take into account the references background as well as what you can physically see. But white fur I just tend to make up with a lot of purples, blues and pinks, and in this case a lot of greens, because I wanted to tie in the colour of the iris into the fur just to kind of create a really nice cohesive feel within the piece. You want to try and stick away from greys as much as possible, because if you just add in the shadows and tones with your grey pencils, you're going to end up with grey looking fur, and that's really not what you want to go after. But as you can see, as I'm building the fur here, I am adding in some grey tones but that's just to kind of map out the darker areas of the fur. And then when it comes to actually toning the fur, you can see that I start to use some earth green, some of the cinnamon and nougat, so adding in some browns, some purple violet, all of those colours that again you would see in a rainbow, and just trying to limit the amount of grey that you actually use in the fur. One of my favourites to use is actually sky blue, just adding a little bit of that, especially into the really brighter areas of white fur. Just really makes it sing, it really brings it to life, and it just makes it look extra white. I don't know why, I don't know the technical term as to why that happens, but if you add some blue into your white fur, it's going to make it look really super duper white. So there's a good tip for you guys. But just make sure that you analyse your reference photo, as always, as you should be when you're drawing realism, and just pay attention to the shadows and really look at the different colours that you can see within your reference photo. A lot of my students say to me, oh, how do you see so many different colours in this fur? And it's just through time and practice and just looking at a load of different reference images. And again, just kind of thinking of, especially in this case, white fur as white light, and just adding in a ton of different colours and just seeing how they go together. Obviously, if you add too many colours in one particular place, you can start to end up with a brown muddy looking area. So just make sure that you don't add too many contrasting or add too many colours in one area as well, otherwise you will end up with a kind of muddy brown look. So try and limit the spaces between your colours, and try not to clump too many fur lines together as well. So as you can see from this, the white fur on this study was relatively simple. There's not really too much detail, just added the detail around the eye, so the full focus is on the eye itself. And I was really pleased with the outcome of this, and I hope that some of the tips that I've given you throughout this short tutorial have helped you guys. As always, leave me a comment down below with what you struggle with most. I really want to hear what you guys would like to see tutorialized on this channel here. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button, because we are well on our way to hitting 20k, and I'm really excited about it, and I would love to have you along for the journey, you very beautiful beans. I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!